Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Maximizing Pre-Assessments in the Recruiting Process. We are super excited. My name is Andrea Butcher. I am the president of HRD Advisory Group, and I will serve as your host. So in your chat feature, you'll see my name listed. Feel free at any time to send through questions. We are having, of course, a technology glitch, as you do when you do these kinds of things. And a lot of folks are showing up as our sales and marketing manager, who's awesome. So it looks like we've got about 15 Joe vendors with us today. So if you wouldn't mind, if you do send through a question, just put your name in the chat feature so that we can address you personally. That would be super helpful. I want to introduce our facilitators for today's webinar. You are in for a treat. So two of our finest, Mark Barnhart. Mark, say hello. And Jake, say hello.
Morning, everybody.
So Jacob and Mark, as you can see, have a ton of experience and are looking forward to sharing with you today some really important tips and some best practices for how to use pre-assessments in your recruiting process. So a couple of things before we get started. I want to talk through the webinar features. So we're going to be doing some interaction. There will be a poll that Jake will pull up when it's time for that. And we're also going to be using the chat feature. So you should each have a bar, either at the top or the bottom. When you click on that, you'll be able to pull up your chat and send messages to us. So Mark and Jake and I are here together, and we'll be monitoring the chat feature to get some interaction. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jake now to get things going.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. So, we see that some people often said that it's really hard to hear. I'm going to pass it from Mark, and I'm going to see if I can work on the feature real quick.
And please chat. Send us a quick chat if it's not, if you can't.
You want to dial in on the phone?
Yeah. All right. So technical difficulties continue. So bear with us 1 second. We're gonna.
Do you want to pull up that dial-up number, and we'll just dial in?
That's a great idea.
You read it off for me?
646 876 9923.
Welcome to Zoom. Enter your meeting ID followed by the pound or hash sign. Enter your participant ID followed by pound. Otherwise, just you are in the Zoom meeting now. There are over 10 participants in the meeting.
All right. So hopefully now you can hear us better. Everyone, people that are dialing in, can you give us a quick, much better?
Great, good.
All right.
All right. So the only thing I would remind is please remember to mute your phones. That would be the other piece for us. So the chat box is going to be the best way to reach us. So thank you for being here, taking time with us today. Certainly, we're excited to have you all join us. We picked this topic on pre-assessments because whether we've been polling our own clients or reading national studies, the one area that everyone seems to always focus on is the obvious. CEOs and hiring managers are saying they can't find top talent for their open positions, and they can't find the right talent is really more what we hear. And so we know it's hard to uncover specific skill sets for your toughest positions, but finding that cultural fit and finding those soft skills, and more importantly, when you finally do find someone that you think is the right person, that diamond in the rough, how do you know that they're not flawed, right? And so how do you find the real person behind the resume? And that's what we're going to show you today, and how assessments can help you with some of that. So my take on this is that we spend more time working than we do at home, for whatever, at least awake, right? We're at home, we're sleeping most of the time, and I have a friend who calls his house his storage shed. He said, I'm at work, and then I come home, I store my stuff, and I go back to work. So our offices have become our second homes, and our project teams are our work families. And so we're looking for the right fit. We're looking for people and hiring the right person to be a great place to work. And while it seems very, very obvious, what we're trying to do is identify people, certainly strong people that share our common goals, people that have similar beliefs, a good work ethic. We're looking for the best people.
Absolutely. Organizations have to have high-performing individuals and teams. And we found a good report. The 2015 Gallup report states that high performers have several things going on for them. Among the list are how engaged they are and how well they use their innate talents and abilities. And really, it's about how those innate talent and abilities match the positions that they're in. But the highest performance comes from the combination of both. This is such an important statement because it raises the question, how well are organizations doing when they look at the results of quality in their hiring process? Another recent study done by LinkedIn, it's the LinkedIn Global Recruiting Trends Report, that's a mouthful. It came back with, found results that talent leaders aren't convinced that they're measuring quality of hire effectively. So if you notice the red circle over there on their chart, this is average, global average of global talent leaders. Only 33% think that they are measuring quality of hire well. And if you look at where the U.S. falls in that, U.S. talent leaders, we're below average, 32%. The reason that this is important, or really what I want to draw out of this, is not necessarily the 32%, though it's really low. It's the fact that only 5% of those think that they're doing it very well, think that they have best-in-class processes, okay? So the way companies hire can't effectively be measured because it's too subjective. Employers cannot rely on the resume and interview to make informed decisions. That's what this is really telling us. In another research study conducted by Mark Murphy, he's the author for hiring for attitude. He found after tracking over like 20,000 new hires, 46% of them failed within 18 months. But what's even more crazy about that is 89% of that was based off of their attitude. So only 11% was actually because of their skills and abilities, which is what we're hiring for. So really, this tells us two things. One, the LinkedIn study that we're looking at here is right on point, okay? Because most organizations are hiring based on skill and technical ability. And two, hiring with intuition or gut, it doesn't work like almost half the time. So I don't think that these stats are really that shocking. Maybe unless, of course, you've never had a bad hire.
So we're gonna do a little interactive poll. So again, hopefully this side of the technology is working well this morning. But what I'd like to do is, and it's not. Okay. Well, we can do it. We can do it through the chat feature. So, what percentage of hires on your team do you think are bad or regretted decisions? You can send it privately in the chat box so people don't know if you're blasting your entire team. But what percentage of hires do you feel in your company are bad or regretted decisions?
And actually, go ahead and respond. I set it to only come to us, so that way
no one will know.
No one will know. No one will see what you're saying. But
so as those are coming through, so 10%, 30%. The Corporate Executive Board, their global market survey, they asked thousands of hiring managers this same exact question. And the answer was a little surprising. What they say, so we've seen everything from 5 to 30% from you folks. They say more than 1 in 5. More than 1 in 5 are a bad hire or a regretted decision. And even more, I guess, disturbing than that or surprising than that is they felt 20% of their entire team shouldn't have been hired in the first place. So our numbers are probably in line with what you're seeing.
Right in line. And, it's funny because when you think about that, what's the risk of that, right? A lot of people are coming back 30, 10%, even at 5%, right? What is the risk of a poor hiring decision?
Yeah, so use that same chat feature and give us some thoughts on what you feel the risks are of making a poor decision.
And I'm sharing this with everybody, so your responses, this way we can learn from each other and see what other perspectives are. Yeah, good. Lost clients, bad client impressions. Good. Keep them coming.
Cultural misalignment. Yep.
Uh-huh.
Team chemistry,
Oh, yeah.
turnover, morale.
Yeah, see, that's right.
Absolutely.
Right in line with things that.
Culture.
Yep.
So some of the things that we're seeing are going to echo the things that you're seeing on the chat screen. So we've got, we're looking same thing, low productivity and performance, cost to recruit and train a new person, negative impact on client relations, frustration, low team morale. So you guys get it. It's the same thing that people nationally are reporting for their poor hiring decisions. And I think the other side of this is
the
there's
risk.
a cost.
Yeah. Anytime there's a risk, there's got to be a cost. So, it's the same thing. Just give us some of your feedback. What do you think the actual cost is to an organization when the hire is bad? Go ahead and type in the chat box there. Share us your insights and your thoughts. And while those are coming in, Mark's going to share with you what he's found as well.
So yeah, we're gonna see a whole bunch of different ideas on here, and depending on what you read, the same thing. You see lots of different theories. I don't know if any of you have read Top Grading. That's Brad Smart's book. If you haven't, here's a shameless plug. I'm not related, but it's a really good book. If you haven't read it, you should. And if you need a copy, I've got a couple, so feel free to reach out. But anyway, Brad said his best guess through their research that for an average company, the cost of a mishire is up to 25 times base comp for those earning under $100,000, and up to 40 times their base for those earning $100,000 to $250,000. It's pretty staggering. And then Zappos, the CEO at Zappos, the online shoe and clothing shop, he's famously stated in an article a year or so ago that the mishires at his company early on cost them as much as $100 million before they started to figure out the best way to bring people on board. So whether we use some of those estimates, even the estimates that we came across, 9 times, 1 times, 2 to 3 times, I think it's clear that it's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money, So, and at this point, knowing that, I think that's the important takeaway here is that, okay, it's going to cost us a lot, right? So, and what's interesting with a bad hire, the path to termination is pretty clear, right? You get a warning, maybe go on probation, and then you're out. Okay, but what about the cost of a mediocre hire? See, with a mediocre hire, it's not quite as clear. It's hard to decide when this mediocre person, when the time has come to part ways, right? The reason being, maybe the mediocre employee, maybe sometimes they often just fly under the radar, or they improve just enough after being redirected, but usually probably just for a short amount of time, right? And mediocre hires, ultimately, they have the same effect on an organization as a bad hire, but the problem is the cost, if not the same, is more times going to be greater. Reason? Because they're there longer, right? They definitely are going to impact morale at a much higher and longer rate. They're going to soak up your manager's time, right? And then ultimately, this really is going to have a cultural impact. So let's explain this a little further. Everybody say hi to Ben. This is Ben.
Hi, Ben.
Ben applied for the sales manager position at your company. Okay? In March, he submitted a polished resume. It had an impressive background that included extensive sales experience. His enthusiasm during the interview stood out among all the candidates, and he seemed like a positive team player. Oh, by the way, his references checked out too. It seemed like this guy, Ben, he seemed like the perfect fit. Especially because in your company, your hypothetical company, you have a bunch of a younger, new workforce. So he seemed like the perfect person to be able to train them.
All right, so he's hired in March, and he's working along, and you're waiting. You're waiting to see this amazing, tenacious guy that you met in the interview, but what's happening is there's a preference for working alone. You're starting to see, and he's avoiding engaging with his team members. He's lacking a sense of urgency, and he's not fitting the culture. He's inaccurate with numbers and data, and it's July, and you're discovering these things, right? His energy is fading. It's obvious it was a bad hire. You just found out the hard way that those exact qualities that maybe made him excel in his previous position aren't working in your organization, aren't meshing with your culture. And I think the key here, you could have known, you could have run assessments to help uncover some of those things and maybe have a clue.
Mark, they should have known. They should have known, and they would have known if they had the right kind of data, right? So how do great organizations hire great people? Really, it comes down to two things, okay? These great organizations, they have a great selection process, and they have the right kind of data. And when we dig into the right kind of data, that's where we're going to dig into the assessment side. But first, having a great selection process. I'm going to give a shameless plug too, Mark, for Patrick Lencioni's book, The Advantage. In this book, he really breaks down a couple good points. And I just want to add, we could do a whole separate webinar just on selection process and really diving into that. But today we're going to focus more on the pre-assessment and how it fits in. But I do want to pull out a couple points. In his book, The Advantage, Lencioni says, first and foremost, too many organizations have not defined exactly what the right and wrong people look like. That is, they haven't clarified a meaningful set of behavioral values that they can use to screen potential employees. Hiring without clear and strict criteria for cultural fit greatly hampers the potential for success in any organization. Little preparation, if any, and no real strategy for identifying critical signs that indicate a candidate will be successful. And you know what I think is interesting about this point is that, again, that aligns with the couple surveys that we reviewed earlier, okay? But I like how he balances it. Then he comes back and he says, when organizations overstructure their hiring process by adding layers of bureaucratic forms and approvals and analysis and all this stuff, it often will diminish the role that judgment must play in the selection process. So what Lencioni is doing here is really he's connecting the importance with having a defined strategy that's balanced with just enough structure to ensure the measure of consistency and adherence to core values. So the first thing I thought of when I was reading through this is, when's the last time we discussed how our selection process aligns with the company's core values and is designed to identify candidates that fit within those? It's just really powerful because it takes it further than just looking at it in the role, right? And to align to those values, you have to look at something outside of what you're going to get in your resume, or even really what you can pick up in the short amount of time you're doing an interview. Okay, so like I said, selection process is key, and then within that process is you got to have the right data. So to be able to find those things to link back to competency. Now, being in HR, when you hear the word data, I kind of freak out a little bit, and it seems overwhelming. It's like, no, we don't want to add more. It's already, you just told me, Lencioni said, don't overcomplicate this thing, right? But, a lot of studies have actually come back and shown that when you use a really good designed selection assessment tool, it's actually going to refine your process, and it's going to shorten the time for your interviews and even your time to make that decision. So it actually will make it more effective. Now, the key in that I said there was if it's used correctly, and that's an important, very important aspect that we'll hit on. So here in a couple minutes. To help illustrate the differences in selection processes, though, we want to take a look at a side-by-side case study of two hiring managers.
All right, so we're going to run this kind of throughout the rest of the webinar, but meet Jan and Dan, two very successful hiring managers. They're both trying to attract new talent to their company right now, and they both have very significant positions they're trying to fill, and they're under the gun, right? They have to fill them by tomorrow. We all know that. So in our little case study here, Jan has decided to utilize assessments in her company's hiring process, and she knows she's got really strong managers. She knows they're incredibly talented, but she also understands that she's going to provide them with this additional tool and help look for some of the hidden things that we've been talking about. Dan, on the other hand, says, you know what? I don't believe that I need that. I've got great people. My gut's so good. I can always find that diamond in the rough. So we'll keep it. They're just now starting their process. We'll check back with them as we go throughout the rest of the webinar. But Jan and Dan are just embarking on a search for a sales manager.
It's a fun process. So how can we help Jan, since, Jan obviously consulted with us on using pre-assessments, pre-hire assessments, and, what are some things that maybe we would point out to Jan? The first question is, there's hundreds, if not thousands, of assessments that are available in the marketplace today, right? So the question is, are they all the same? And this is the most simple way I can say this is no, they're not. And this is really important. In fact, it almost seems a little onerous in how many assessments there are out there and available, but it's really important that companies and hiring managers take the time to assess the assessment, right? And to make sure that they're using something. When you're assessing or looking at the right assessment for selecting candidates to hire, some of the key differences and things that you want to look for is, number one, for a selection tool, you want to make sure that it's designed and validated for pre-hire selection, okay? So an example of this is we're authorized partners with Wiley's assessments, and Wiley has a couple fantastic assessments that we use with clients all the time. One is DISC, and the other one's called the PXT Select. So both, like I said, are fantastic. However, DISC is not validated for selection, and it really should not be used as a pre-hire assessment. This doesn't measure for specific skill, aptitude, or factor specific to any position. It's not a predictive assessment. So assumptions, really, not that they shouldn't, I guess I should say shouldn't, I would say you can, but since it doesn't do that, you shouldn't use it to determine probability of success in a position, because that could put you into some compliance, concerns, some compliance issues. So typically what we do is we guide people towards an assessment that's more similar to the PXT Select. Okay, the PXT Select, conversely to the DISC, it provides a more comprehensive assessment for hiring and development. Okay, it was created specifically for employee selection and covers interests, cognitive abilities, and behavior traits. So when I say it's designed, it's when they design these assessments, they have to do tons of testing to make sure that they are reliable and valid, and it has to be on the specific purpose. So anytime you use something or an assessment that isn't designed for that purpose, that hinders and does not match up with the reliability it's been tested for. Again, that can put you in some serious compliance concerns. So you really want to find something that will focus on cognitive abilities, behavior traits, and really that predictive element to a fit in the job. Okay, so that's a key example. There's other lots of different assessments that are out there, because we're also authorized with PAN. We have access to assessments like the Hogan, assessments through Berkman, and Divine Selection assessments. And then there's other ones on the market today like Predictive Index or SHL, Occupational Personality. These type of assessments have been designed specifically for the selection process, and this is vital when you're determining what assessment to use to make sure that it's designed for that purpose. Another important aspect is you want to make sure, and this gets into when we're evaluating, okay, I found an assessment now that is validated for pre-hire selection. So there's all different types of, pre-hire selection-based assessments, from very complex and skill-driven to, some that are much more general. So, but what's really important, because we know, based on what we talked about earlier, what Lencioni pointed out, part of this is the selection process and what the assessment can do in this process for you. And the ability to link with your core competencies, okay, and your performance metrics and values is really important. So you want to make sure that the assessment you're looking at provides you with the research to back, their abilities to do these type of things. Okay, and then once again, it's got to predict job fit. That is one of the biggest differentiators of what a selection assessment does versus other personality-based assessments that are out there. So when we're looking at predicting job fit, you know, like Lencioni said, we have to identify what those success factors are, right? So looking at some of the predictors of success, a good selection assessment measures thinking style, which is your cognitive, right? Your behavioral traits and your interests. These three areas are what impact an individual's approach to situations in the workplace. Okay, and that's what's really important. So, you know, the better assessments out there will really bring in where it says under pre-hire assessment, the thinking, behavioral, and interest. Okay, when you have that, assessments have the ability to equip your organization and your hiring managers with, you know, easy to understand information about the candidate, and it will provide you, especially really good ones, intuitive type questions that will help strengthen your interview process, right? And that's one of the benefits out of these type of assessments is really being able to ask questions related to the person. Now, where if you don't use an assessment, you know, the EOC says you have to be consistent in the way that you run your process and how you treat people. Well, the assessment tool itself here is the consistent basis that EEOC recognizes. So now you can go in and actually ask questions that are related to people's behaviors. And, you know, Mark will talk a little bit later about validity on tests and the impact of that. So.
Okay, so remember Jan. Jan was starting her interview process, and she's using the assessment tools in that process. So she's been able to shorten her candidate list down to 2 people. She's interviewed maybe four or five folks to this point. She's narrowed that down to 2 by using just what Jake was just talking about, those predictors of success to help look at who the best fit was. And she's going to bring those finalists in for one more interview, and she's going to use the data that came from those assessments to dig a little deeper into a couple of areas where she and her team may have had some concerns. Dan is still interviewing. He's looking at another candidate. He's very frustrated. He hasn't spoken to anyone yet that seems to fit the culture or have the drive that he's looking for. The resumes all look good, but he's just not quite sure. But there's one person, this last person he talked to, really feels they may have finally found someone that has, you know, the right background and qualifications. He thinks he's got this person. He's really hopeful.
It feels so
Feels good.
He feels just right. I noticed that we just had a question on there. Sorry, I missed that earlier. So the question is validated scientifically or for EEO adverse impact. That's a great question. And, you know, again, a short answer to that is both. You know, you want to look for an assessment that is both reliable and has the validation standards. And the EEOC defines what those boundaries or those metrics are to test against that for both of those elements. So that's a great question. All right, so a little bit more on the selection process. So again, you know, like I mentioned earlier, we could do a whole separate webinar on selection. So I'm just going to focus in right now on where an assessment can fit in this process, okay? So, you know, no matter what assessment you use, and again, they can vary greatly. The main thing that we want to look for here is how can it help you in your specific process? Everybody will have a different purpose. So, for example, we have some clients that might have a portion of their workforce that they know they're going to have a consistent turnover, right? So how important is assessment in that hiring process, especially when your need to fill is really, it needs to be turned around really, really quickly. You know, as a believer in this tool, I'd say an assessment is great at any level because there's value in every job. But, you know, it's also understandable that for certain positions, you know, maybe we look at a different type of assessment that isn't as complex and comprehensive. But we also have clients that really focus in on their management level, for executive level, to make sure, because we all know how important it is to have the right managers in place, right? Really using the assessment in this. And, you know, the key is a good assessment tool. It's going to give you, like like I mentioned earlier, intuitive questions based around that person to help you with your interview process. So really, you want to work that in early into your whole selection process. So another important point I want to make out of this is assessment tools, a selection assessment tool, no matter which one you use, not one of them is going to be able to predict 100% job fit, and it shouldn't be used. In fact, this is a key point that I was referring to earlier. It's important to use these assessments in your process, but to stay compliant in how you use it, it should only weigh as maybe a third, okay? A third of your overall decision. And really, that's because there's those subjective areas and the other technical data that you pick up, such as experience and knowledge and those abilities is really important. And then, of course, in the interview data that you pick up, how they fit in the culture. So you really want a third for experience, a third for the assessment, and a third for interview data.
So regardless of where you're going to use that assessment in your process, whether it's early in the interview process, whether it's with your finalists, the process should begin with looking at the job itself, right? A well-defined job description. And then you also need to define how someone is successful in that job. And what does a top performer in that role look like? We're calling that a performance model here in this next slide. And is that's going to help you measure and look at a lot of factors, but the most important one there that's often difficult to evaluate is in your traditional process is that behavioral side, the thinking and the interests that this person has of the top performers. So you want to use maybe the best in your organization to set that benchmark, right? You can base it off the traits of the people who are currently successful in that role or in your organization by having your top performers take this, have your whole team take an assessment, and build a specific model for what you're trying to measure against. Jake mentioned the PXT Select. We have, in that particular assessment, you can build your own, but you can also pull from a library that they have of hundreds, probably thousands of case studies. They look at the Department of Labor databases, and then as clients build profiles, they implement those to build additional library cases or library. What's the word I'm looking for, Jake? It's the library.
Yeah, I mean you're building your success profiles basically that you can link back. And this is what Mark's talking about here is so important because I mean you have to define what success is, right? On the job
for your organization,
right? For your organization, and good assessments are better when you're looking at different assessments out there. There's a couple of key things with that. First, they will allow you to test the results against a position, okay? But those I guess more top tier or comprehensive assessments are ones that will also give you the ability to adapt that to your culture. But like I mentioned earlier, there's things within the process that you need to take time and make sure that you do it right? Because if you're basing it off of your performance model, then you want to make sure that that's aligned, right? And how do you define and what are you using now to define those success traits? So building a performance model is a key part of it, and making sure you do it right, obviously, is important. And then, of course, it's the validation, right?
Yeah,
Some of those top assessments will validate. Like again, PXT, since that's one that we use with a lot of our clients, they actually do the same validation and reliability testing, looking at over thousands of top performers to ensure their performance library is up to date. So you can even take that model to build off of your top performers to ensure it's compliant as well as tested against good results. If that makes sense. So, and basically all of this leads to, what we're talking about here is job fit, right? So you get what's required for the position, right? Your performance model, and then you get the measure of the candidate's thinking style, behavioral traits, and interests. When you combine those and compare those together, you're going to get, comprehensive ratings that show you how well they fit. And then they build the interview questions off of that, right? So now you can focus in on maybe those areas that they're just outside just outside that range or just a little bit maybe lower of a fit, well, now you can focus your interviewing question on that because you know they're good everywhere else. So and that's one way it can help reduce your time.
Okay.
Oh, Jan!
Jan's excited.
Way to go, Dan.
All right. Remember, Jan was bringing her top 2 finalists back for a final interview, and she was using the data points and using the notes that she had acquired off of the assessment to ask some additional probing questions around a couple areas of concern for her. So she sent her finalists through that assessment. They dug a little deeper, and her gut was telling her there might have been a problem with the last candidate's ability to work independently, and the assessment actually confirmed that. So between her gut, what she saw in the interview, the resume, the references, and then the assessment, she said, yep, there's something here. I don't like it. She chooses the other candidate, and her selection process is complete. The individual is accepted, and she is done with her interview process.
All right, Jan, way to go. Oh, Dan.
Dan's not happy.
He's praying right now, right? So, Dan has also interviewed dozens and dozens of people in a lengthy interview process and asking the same questions. And really, his gut tells him that this one guy that he really met, he's solid. He seems to have the impressive resume. His stories were fantastic. Maybe not all relevant, but really clicked with them because they were funny and, they had a lot in common. And there were a few aspects that Dan was also uncertain about, but you know what? He hired this individual that his gut told him to go with based off the stellar resume, the asking for references. So he's praying. He's praying that this is a good fit.
Okay, so we've been talking about validity. Jake mentioned it earlier. I think I mentioned it earlier. You should only use assessments as one part of the hiring process. I think that we've hammered that point. But it's also key to remember you have to use it properly as a part of the process, not the sole deciding factor. But so a couple weeks ago, I was actually talking to someone about this, and the question came up about what about potential legal concerns when using assessments, right? And certainly that's a valid point. There's basically the person said, are these things safe to use, right? So I would say the simple answer is yes. If you dig a little deeper, in fact, if you look at an employee assessment, it can actually improve the legal defensibility of your hiring system, whether that's an entry-level person to the executive suite. The assessments provide that additional layer of consistency and data, and quite frankly, as we've been talking about, it's going to give you better quality hires in the process. So when done properly, yes, assessments are legally defensible, and they can also enhance that process. But then the search says, well, why? Why is that the case? And I think Jake mentioned earlier, it's because assessments provide their objective data points in the selection process, as opposed to an interview, which is very subjective. So you're getting that numerical score for where you can clearly support a related selection decision. So, and you're comparing apples to apples as you put people through those assessments. So remember that the traits measured in an assessment can't, and most importantly, they should not be tied directly to the requirements for the successful job performance, right? Should be, tied to that.
Should.
Which bolsters your defensibility in that hiring process if you had to go the legal route. So in other words, fear not. I think based on what we have seen and read, that assessments, if done properly, not only improve your hiring efficiencies, but can increase your legal defensibility as well.
That's right. Yeah, Mark, and great points. And I'll go back to the earlier slide when I was addressing this, where people run into legal issues. 9 out of 10 times, if they're using a selection tool, right, that was designed for that, it's not because of that tool that they run into legal issues. It's because maybe they only use that tool for their sole decision. They didn't look at the interview process, right? Maybe they didn't even use the interview at all, and they didn't look at experience, and they didn't look at the other factors that help balance that out. And that's why, again, I don't want to be like a broken record, but I got to emphasize it should always only be used as a third. So, this again is where having a good selection process is key, along with the data. But absolutely, Mark, when it's validated, it will definitely support you even more than the traditional, right? Because, let's be honest, how often and comfortable are we that managers are always doing things very consistently and asking the same questions, which you'd have to do if you don't have
Right.
an assessment tool like this, right? So I feel like I can see nodding heads, even though I can't.
I'm nodding my head.
So, you know, I want to hit on a couple other things that, because our hope today is really to emphasize why a pre-hire selection tool can be a great benefit for you. So, other things that you can look at is what else should assessment tool provide, okay? And I love this dude for dummies. That's Ben from earlier. That's Ben. So Mark, actually, I love his perspective on this. We were talking the other day, and he's like, having an assessment like this, especially a good one, it's like having a manual for a person, right? We get manuals for everything else to learn how to use them, right? Like for this webinar.
Yeah, your DVD player.
DVD player, whatnot. So this is like a manual for your person. And good assessments, they will provide a slew of reporting, not just on the selection side, okay? I mean, they do on the selection side. That's what they're designed for. But you want to look for ones that can help you, in other areas as well. Some examples of that could be, how can they help you with succession planning, right? Of course, it being a selection tool, selection isn't just at hire, you're selecting to promote, right? So you can reuse this tool when you're evaluating internal staff for something like that. A good data set with the reporting can help you do job realignment. It can provide reporting that can help you with your of course, it can provide development reports, right, for coaching. Great for the onboarding process, because we all know once you bring somebody in, I mean, the next critical step in that process is making sure they have a great orientation and a great onboarding process. Well, good assessments will provide tools for your managers to be able to understand that person, have their manual, right, and be able to coach them to get the most out of their performance and know what makes them tick and what areas maybe they're not good. Maybe you realign the job, right, because their talent is so strong, they're going to be a good fit here. So some of those areas that they're weaker on, somebody else can pick up. So great ways that you can use a great assessment for this. Team development is another big area, being able to look at, especially if you use this consistently, well, you have this data for everybody who's on your team. So equipping your team leader or your manager with, the ability to look at the dynamics of that team is huge. So I know I get a little excited about some of the different ways it can be used. It's just,
calm down, Jake.
Calm down. To me, it's a no-brainer. It makes sense if you can get all that, right? The cost for one assignment or for one assessment and be able to use that data in that way, it's awesome.
All right, so we can all agree that great organizations hire great people because they have a great process, right? That utilizes a selection assessment. So kind of a quick recap. We're trying to hire the best people. We're looking at, you're looking at the selection process should include clearly defined behavioral success traits for each position.
Pre-hire assessment should only be a third of your decision. If used properly in the selection process, the assessment can help reduce your overall interview time to decide while increasing a position filled with success and happy candidates. And one thing we didn't really talk about or address, but I think it's important, we started out with building the case, right? What is the cost of having a bad hire? Well, it's only going to be a fraction of the cost of an assessment, or it's going to be the cost for assessment is only a fraction of the cost for getting that bad hire, right?
Remember that big pile of money slide?
Yeah.
And you get that user's manual,
you get the user's manual.
Fantastic if you don't have a 12-year-old son to set it up for you at home. All right, so you want to be like Jan, right? Jan used that assessment tool. It helped enhance her whole selection process, and she checked it against her gut, and now she's happy with her selection, and she's off on vacation enjoying a little R&R.
Yeah, so be like Jan. Don't be like Dan. Poor Dan. While Jan's off on vacation, sits in wine at the pool, Dan has to start the whole hiring process all over again. You know why? Because he hired Ben, our mediocre Ben from the beginning, and it didn't work out. So now he's got to go through the whole tedious process all over again. He should have used assessments.
So thank you. If we got a few minutes here. If there's any questions, I think use the chat feature for that as well.
Yeah. Hopefully we've delivered and given you some good insights and different insights. You guys, you can always reach out to us. We'll do a follow-up email on the webinar, but reach out to us if you have questions. Does anybody have any questions now that you'd like to ask, or anything you want to share? Maybe even we have a little time, success stories with if you use assessments now and how they've helped you, or
Will we be
I
getting
will
the
be
slides?
getting the slides. Thank you, Joe Bender.
Yes. So if someone asked if they'll be getting slides, we absolutely can send out. We'll have a recording available.
Yeah. Well, if we don't have any questions or any success stories to share, because we're all like Jan.
That's right. You want to be like Jan.
That's right.
So we do have certainly you see on the slide. You can connect to us on social media. Please do. We've got we mentioned Joe Bender a couple of times. He is populating some of those sites for us, as well as the rest of the team has some pretty neat things that we're publishing out there. So feel free to do that. And then this is just the second in a series of webinars, and we've got another one coming up.
Yeah, emotional intelligence on December the 7th. So Shirley Triller leads our talent development and outplacement practice areas, and she has deep expertise in this area. You will not want to miss her talking about what it is, why it's important, and how to develop it.
It's going to be riveting.
It is going to be riveting, no doubt. And then we have on our website, hrdadvisorygroup.com, on the events page, you will see the series that Mark just referenced. So yeah, we have January through June of 2018 as well. We have all kinds of different topics. We are a one-stop solution for all of your HR resources, and so we want to show that through these webinars, the expertise that we have in recruiting, benefits, talent development, and outplacement. So join us in December and beyond. Yep. All right, well, thank you all.
Yeah,
and
thank you very much.
Enjoy the rest of your day.
I'll stay on for just a few minutes if anybody has questions that they want to ask.